Hey everyone, my name is Juliana and this is Juliana Talks Films, the channel where I go through the process of producing and examining films. If you love films and filmmaking, consider subscribing for weekly videos. Today we're focusing on director duo Josh and Benny Safdie. The Safdie Brothers have been directing films since childhood, citing their father as their main source of inspiration for getting into filmmaking. The two grew up in New York City and were exposed to various people who encouraged and influenced their work. The brothers are known for tackling true-to-life subject matter where their characters often straddle between the lines of poverty, addiction, and moral convictions. Their strength really lies in their deep character development for each subject, which often leads to plausible and sometimes really hard to swallow scenarios that seem all too real. Some of their better known features include Heaven Knows What, Good Time, and their latest, Uncut Gems. They also have a robust slate of short films spanning from the beginning of their filmmaking career. These guys are the real deal, true auteurs and creative connoisseurs. They're the kind of directors that you truly aspire to become as a beginning filmmaker. So here are Josh and Benny's top 5 tips for filmmaking. Lesson 1. Know your characters.
The character development is something, you know, it's just the necessary work that has to get done, especially because, you know, we were coming from working with, you know, our previous film, the lead actress is not only a first-time professional, it's her story that she's reenacting. And you know, with Rob, you know, he's not Connie. He doesn't come from that world. So like it was kind of an effort for us to know how he would move in the narrative, was to just really know this character, and for him to be able to pull from a life of character development. And we started off like broadly, and then I just kind of got into it. And I was like, no, we can't really gloss over, you know, age 1 to 4. We have to like show what's going on in that early. We were thinking like Freud almost. So we ended up breaking it down into like 3-month periods throughout his whole life, and then ends up, you know, minutes before his character actually enters the movie.
I think that was the interesting thing as well. When you do something having such a detailed backstory, it's not just like, oh, he did this at this point and that, but if it's something so detailed, you can really see the patterns in someone's behavior. So it actually looks like you can actually see what a character is, rather than just kind of have just a few events in their life.
I mean, it is worth noting that like when we did this stuff, like now as we're entering like the promotional part of of this process, I didn't even realize that was like a thing. Like the character, I mentioned it when, you know, we were talking about it in Cannes, and then all of a sudden I'm like, kind of, you know, I don't know. It's like it's not like a thing that we're doing. It's very organic. Is my point, is that we were kind of doing it because we had to do it.
Yeah. And you guys, even I was seeing in one interview, were charting the emotional.
That was weird. That was weird.
Well, that makes sense.
Well, it was like we went crazy at one point. We're like, okay, what's wrong? We were watching the movie. We're like, there's something wrong with this edit, this version of it. And it's like, what is it? And we were charting the emotional path of the film. Yeah. And that's kind of it was, for me. It was like, okay, the movie needs to move at the speed of Connie and Connie's brain. And
Which
you need
is fast.
Yes, fast. And it also the moment it emotionally dips down, it's dead.
Well, because you're as a viewer, you're kind of rolling through this roller coaster of a movie, and it's a lot of action, and there's things that come up where morally they're a little ambiguous, but the point is that you show in the moment. Sometimes people don't have time to think morally what they would do.
You're just going along like, oh my God, why did I just do that? It's like, but on to the next thing. You know, it's like, what happened?
Brings up a good point, which is that you gave her this massive backstory, and I briefly mentioned Jonathan Demme backstage when we were talking, and one of the things that he always said was, whoever is on camera is the star of the movie in that given moment, and everybody that appears in this movie feels like they have a backstory. Going with Talia's character, who feels like she has this amazing backstory, and her grandmother she becomes a weird character for the moments that she's on. Can you talk about doing that? Because obviously when you're trying to drive plot forward, you're finding people that are going to engage with the plot. At what point do you start sort of expanding those characters and knowing how much to expand them and how they'll fit into the film?
I mean, you have to do that first, and then you can write the scenarios. You can't know what your character's going to do unless you know the characters in a way. And with Talia, you know, it was interesting is that we wrote this character, and then we did this basically citywide search. Street casting, went to every borough. We did an open casting call. 600 people showed up, and Talia was one of them. And in her interview, she kind of was telling these stories. You know, she didn't know anything about the movie, and they were lining up with some of the character background that we had already written for Crystal, except her whole attitude is a little different than Crystal, so she played her a different way. But I think that was sometimes you have these serendipitous moments where you kind of will it to the world, and these things kind of come to you. And I do believe in the sudden star, and I think that a star is well beyond the people on the cover of tabloid magazines. That they're people you can meet every day, and it's a gravitational pull, and that's our casting department seriously understands that. And it's an honor, honestly, to work with first timers and very established actors who still somehow maintain that kind of luminosity and that kind of gravitational pull of like it's almost their first time, and that's like I bow down. Barkat Abdi, who's not here as well. I mean, I don't know. So we are. Someone once asked us who's in control, the director or the actor, and a bunch of people in the room raised their hand for the director. And someone said the actor, and then I didn't raise my hand for either because I wasn't sure. And ultimately, I think the actor is in control because, it's their soul. So I don't know.
Lesson 2. Use authenticity as your baseline for casting.
Casting it's hard to say what is the most important part of filmmaking. With casting, as you always say, the greatest casting is better than the best screenwriting. So
what's amazing is there were whenever we would get these emails, they would just be this like long list of people. And I think for the character that ended up being Keith, there were Phil, Keith. Well, Keith that ended up being Keith.
Half the crowd hasn't seen the movie, so it could be either one.
There's like a heavy that's in the movie, and it could be so on the nose, the casting for that, because the guy could just look the part. But we desperately wanted to have somebody who had a lot more kind of history to them and more kind of just character. And so that was a really hard one to find. I think you went through so many people. But again, all of these people, even if they weren't right, there was something interesting about each one of them. That you could, you learn, and then let's move in that direction.
We got onto something interesting about the casting process and how it informs the writing, and I don't want to, I want it's important because this is the first group of people who are really hearing us talk about the way we made this thing. It was like a decade's worth of work, but it was, for example, like this character Keith Richards, his audition tape comes in, we watch it, and as a group we react to it, first as just like, oh my God, look at this character, and he is doing a somewhat structured improvisation, and he's deciding to bring ideas to the table, and that's kind of what we look for, someone who can bring ideas, because then we'll show it to Ronnie, and we'll look at it, and then there was one particular thing that we really globbed onto, and then we ended up working that into the script, and then we talked to Jen about that, and Jen starts to develop this rigor with the people who are getting to the next step. And then Jen's really putting them through it. They got to show up at this time, now again, and through persistence and responsible people, you end up starting to lose certain people, certain candidates that you would usually fall to the wayside. But when you get to the point where all of a sudden when we're showing up and we're working with them, now we've actually gone in and we've worked this dialogue from an improvisation that we really like now into the script, and we're giving this script back to the person, and we're saying, all right, now let's try seeing that with superstructure. So to me, it's important to know that like you were focusing on a lot of the first-time actors, but the film for us was the first time we were working with a lot of veteran actors as well, who are used to hitting beats, hearing lines, knowing when they can come in.
Oh, you're saying that. All I can think of, I remember when we're in the truck, there's a scene that happens. It's very enclosed. Eric Bogosian. There's a very enclosed scene. There's 3, 4, 5, 6 people in the car, right? And then Josh and I are in the trunk. And there's 3 first-time actors, and then Eric and Adam. And
a stunt coordinator.
Who's driving, who's making sure everything is safe. It gets very violent in there, and everybody's screaming, and Eric keeps trying to get his lines in. And at one point he starts screaming, he goes, I have lines! And he got so angry, but then
he said, I don't know about you guys, but I have lines that I have to say.
Yes, that's exactly right. And he hits the dashboard so hard, he's like, I almost broke my hand. But then we realized, okay, I said, look.
I loved it. I was like, let me go talk to this guy.
But then we talked to him, we said, okay, look, Eric, if they're not listening to you, just tell them, shut the fuck up, and then say your line. Because Now he's like, he just works in. He's like, oh yeah, great, I'm the boss. I can tell him shut the fuck up.
Consistent with the character.
Yeah. So he tells him that, and then he gets his line off. So you have to figure out how to work this in with everybody in an interesting way.
There's a challenge there where Eric, and we talk about this with Sandler and with a bunch of actors in it, where wait, this guy has mastered playing himself. He's lived that life for 50 years, 40 years. Whoever the first-time actor who is borrowing deeply from their own experience. Sometimes these actors feel a bit of a burden and kind of intimidated that they're like, I can never match that 50 years of experience. I was just in a romantic comedy last week. Like, you know, it actually raises the stakes for them and it brings the best out of them.
I remember Scott Rudin asking me, but can he act? And and I wrote a response to that, and because that's when all of a sudden, you know, 15 years of working with, you know, people who you've met on the street or first timers comes into handy, because you start to try to put into words what makes somebody, what creates an instinct of somebody being a good performer or a natural performer. And I was pulling like NBA interviews
clips
to show, you know, Scott that he was a natural.
There were clips from his show where he showed just raw emotion
and passion,
and it's like, this is a show on national television, and he's not afraid to express himself in that way, and that goes back to what Jeff was saying.
I also said
to play himself, you have to be comfortable showing the world what you think of yourself, and that's a very, very complicated.
And then take to that reading words that are being told are yours. Exactly. And that was what was so cool about Kevin, is that he was willing to play a strange version of himself that's not really him. You know, he wouldn't really, you know, get into a situation like he does in the movie. But I remember saying to Scott, I was like, I've only been wrong once, just trust me.
Lesson 3, inspiration is everywhere.
Yeah, we were really inspired by the text, by the people, by the stars, you know.
You don't really go...
And not so much visually by anything else. I mean, we really wanted this haze and developed that. Sorry?
Like a wooziness, kind of,
Absolutely. I mean, like sometimes, you know, someone said it yesterday, like a gauze is in front of the screen. And you know, because there is such a short-sightedness when you live such a present life on the street, you know, like you can only see 6 feet ahead and 6 feet behind you. You can think in terms of hours as opposed to days, as opposed to weeks, as opposed to years, obviously. And I'm always interested in that. So we wanted to try to somehow match that visually. Obviously, there's, you know, all these things are instinctual thoughts. They're not like didactic conversations. You know, this is, you know, we're just expressing. So,
but we don't really go into movies with like a catalog of things we want to emulate. You know, there's a couple of times where it's mostly emotional things in movies. You know, it's not. Sometimes we do have visual references, but you know what I mean? It's not.
It is interesting though, because for Uncut Gems, there was like 6 or 7 books that we were inspired by, and the book Ariel wrote, Mad Love in New York City. That's the only text that we were inspired by for this.
I said it earlier. It's like the rare instance where the movie comes before the book.
Yeah.
But when you read the book, you won't have. It's going to be so different from the movie. It's going to be interesting.
Lesson 4: reality is stranger than fiction.
You know, when you make a thriller, and like in this day and age, people are such know-it-alls because of the general nature of the internet and how knowledge is readily available. Yeah. You know, that you have this scrutiny that you have to live by. It's like, that would never happen. That's unrealistic. Everything this day and age, like the most basic philosophical question is something real or fake? I mean, you see that all the time in YouTube comments.
Right.
So we approached each situation with that scrutiny, and then you know, something from an emotional place in terms of where someone's at in their life, and all of a sudden you can kind of walk through a narrative in a very kind of real time, as from a writing approach, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like, you know, and then don't forget where we're at in America, so you can, you know, I'd say like the most interesting, the most revelatory part of the screenwriting process for us was when we got to the section in the film where Connie and the Ray character are in the amusement park in Adventureland, and the cops are literally in the park approaching them, and they're with this African immigrant unconscious on the ground, and they really had no other option. We were like, how is he going to get out of it? Does the movie end here, or does the movie figure out what to do with Connie in police custody right now? And we really looked at all this, possible outcomes. And when we realized that he could get away with it if he could just present himself as a security guard and let kind of the systemic racism in America and in the police force, not all cops are racist, but, whatever, in Long Island at this time of night, what have you, when we realized that he could get away with it just by presenting the situation in a very kind of matter-of-fact way, that was a weird turning point for us, because all of a sudden we were like, wait a second, what's really happening here with this movie? Because it wasn't like we wanted to set out and make this film about, race. Right? We were just trying to tell a pulpy story, a movie that we wanted the movie to feel dangerous, but then all of a sudden in this moment we're like, wait a second, this is totally plausible, and any kind of cutthroat audience would also go with this moment without even batting an eye. And the fact that no one would bat an eye to this plays into this kind of, assumed and kind of just accepted way of life. And that's when we kind of started, I would say that became, we would go back and kind of approach other scenarios in the film and really take all things into consideration at any moment. So it was an interesting writing process because it was almost a real-time writing process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, all movies like that, you're caught up in the action, you're caught up in this great character study and absorbing everything, but there are a lot of other undercurrents going through there. There's sort of an interesting racial thing going on as well that he kind of takes advantage of in an interesting way. The fact that, when the police arrive and they see the security guard tied up, they obviously assume that he's done something wrong. And I'm kind of guessing that race is playing a factor.
Of course. This movie takes place today, and when you're making a genre movie, specifically a kind of a thriller, a one night, cops are after you film, I guess I'll call it that. You're as an audience member and as a creator, you're kind of saying you're constantly putting the viewer in a position of, would you, the plausibility, would that happen? Could you get away with this? And as writers, we found ourselves almost in like a stream of conscious, we knew the characters really well, and we, write through the scenario, and we would always, if he got caught, if we couldn't figure out a way to get Connie out of the scenario, he would get caught, and that would be the movie. But we always did kind of survey, the scenario, and we thought about it as, New York in 2017, and that moment is definitely like, it's a strange thing to think that it's plausible. And it's totally plausible. As a viewer, you just roll with it. And the fact that we roll with it, we should be thinking about that. Because, to the fact that two white cops walk in to a amusement park in the middle of the night, and first of all, Connie, who, more or less looks like a scumbag, but he's, a white scumbag, and is just telling them, that this man on the floor, and they just take it as fact. And like you think, if the situation was switched, would that be necessarily the case? I don't know. And then when the scene immediately following it is the only two people who are detained are the two black people in the scene, and they're the innocent ones. And it's, I don't know, it's our DP, like he cried in that moment, and he was like, oh, it's so emotional. And he said it was for a different reason, but I don't know. I think that it was for another.
And lesson 5, use music intentionally.
What we saw in the final product with this like kind of heightened use of music, like it was front and center. It wasn't background music, you know what I mean? It was, like a choir singing, except again, machines.
Right.
Was so interesting. The results were so kind of contradictory, but at the same time so in tune with how I wanted to feel that we wanted to keep going with that, and that's how I met One on Tricks Playing Never. He saw Heaven Knows What and really reacted to the use of music in the movie, and I was a fan of his. And then I kind of met with him and started talking to him about this way to use music as almost another character in the movie, and he was really into it from the get-go. And there's like someone recently was telling me about this movie, The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez. Their first description of the movie. It's like, it's this great film. It's kind of based on a true story in the Alamo, about this kind of this miscommunication between a Mexican and the sheriff, and someone got shot, and they're like, and then they say it's like beautiful and it's great performances, but it has the weirdest soundtrack. And I said, what do you mean? They're like, it's just so strange for this southern like kind of pulpy tale. It has this weird electronic soundtrack. And I was like, I got to see this thing. So, because I love the idea of that, the idea that there is this thing that people he felt the need to tell me about it.
Right,
and it's great. It's a great way to kind of, it was a great accompany. It was a great companion to the movie. So I don't know, the use of music is like, again, I look at the music and the lighting of the film in the exact same way. I think of them as in the same exuberant light, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
And it's a character. I think Connie and the music are like totally hand in hand. And, we spent so much time developing that score. Like, I feel so, I love, obviously music is the most popular thing in the world. And we all have a relationship with it, no matter who you are, unless you're deaf. Sorry. But even, I'm sure deaf people have a relationship with music because they see people reacting to it. Yeah, they can feel it. Music is something that we all kind of just have an innate understanding of.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I feel immensely inspired to write and make some films after hearing these guys talk about their process and everything that they've kind of gone through with each film. What other bits of knowledge did you guys get from the Safdies that weren't included in this video? Leave a comment below and let me know. I hope you all enjoyed and found this video helpful on your filmmaking journey. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.